Okay, it's nice to have the chance to talk about something other than Atheism Plus, which is what I'm going to do now. One of the beauties of YouTube, it can get slagged off for all kinds of things, is that you can dispute and disagree with who the hell you like. It's an open forum. In this video, I'm going to be disagreeing with Bionicdance and with Matt Dillahunty over this question of the statement, of the proposition God exists and what classifies you as an atheist. What I'll allow them to do, I'll allow them to put it in their own words. I think that's the best thing to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is to read you what Bionicdance has to say this, because it's quite succinct the way she wrote this comment on one of her videos. The question being asked is, do you believe a deity exists? And unless the answer is yes, the person answering is an atheist. Okay, what I'm going to do now then is I'll play you a clip from Matt Dillahunty where he makes more or less the same point, and then I'll give you my response.
Have meanings. And theism carries with it the meaning that one believes there is a God, and that is a binary position. Either you believe that there is a God or you do not. There is no in between.
Okay, well, I'm not the first person to challenge them on this. I know that Christina had certainly challenged them on this already in her way. I might link to that. I'm going to challenge them in my way. It seems there's a couple of ideas that undergird what they're saying. The first is that you can't you can't believe something, you can't believe a proposition and not believe a proposition. Let's just explain what we mean by the way, just to get the terminology right. When somebody says I believe that God exists is the proposition, believe is the attitude towards the proposition. And what they're saying is you can't hold two conflicting attitudes towards that proposition. You can't say, well, I believe that God exists and I don't believe that God exists at the same time. On that point, I totally agree with them. They're also saying that you can't part believe something. You can't say, well, I 50% believe. Well, you could say it, but it doesn't make any sense. You can't 50% believe that God exists. I totally agree with that. I accept what they're saying there. But that's beside the point. You can't part believe a proposition, but the proposition itself can include a probabilistic element in it. We do that all the time, don't we? If I say to you, I'm going to toss a coin, and I say, you know, how are you going to describe your position on that? What statement would describe your position? Well, if you were to say, I believe the coin will land heads, I don't think that would represent your position. So you'd have to reject that and say, I don't believe the coin will land heads. What about the coin will land tails? Well, I would suggest that you would reject that as well. What you need is a probabilistic proposition, don't you? Something like, there is a 50% chance the coin will land heads. Then you would accept that. Then you would say, I believe there is a 50% chance the coin will land heads. So you can have a probabilistic element. It just needs to be within the proposition itself. Now, this is the problem. When you talk about the statement, I believe that God exists, what we're talking about there with God exists is that there's a 100% chance that God exists. And what they're saying is that, well, unless you can express a 100% certainty that God exists, then you're an atheist. But there's real problems if we start adopting that kind of line. Most of the Anglican Church would all class as atheists. Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury, if you said to him, I can guarantee if you said to him, Rowan, do you accept there's some finite possibility that you could be wrong and that God doesn't exist? He would say, well, yes, I'm a human being. I accept that I could be wrong. I can't say that I have 100% certainty that I have to be right on the issue. So do we class the Archbishop of Canterbury as an atheist? That would be a ridiculous thing to do. So I contend that when we look at the statement God exists, what we've got is the wrong proposition to start with. It may well be true that you can only say, I believe that God exists or I do not believe that God exists. But what you're doing is you're looking at the wrong proposition on which to assess whether somebody is a theist. A much better proposition would be something like a very high probability that God exists, or a high probability that God exists. If somebody is happy to say, I believe there is a very high probability that God exists, then they're a theist. If they reject that and say, I do not believe there is a very high probability that God exists, then they're not a theist. I think that makes 1,000 times more sense than what Bionicdance and what Matt Dillahunty are saying. If anybody disagrees with me on that, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, that's all I wanted to say. Bye for now.